Since the Saiyan race was exterminated, Frieza had maintained his position as the Empire's ruler. The senior members of the Force, honestly, they knew the truth about what happened, despite that official story that said that planet Vegeta was destroyed by a stray meteorite or something like that. Conversely, Cooler successfully subjugated planets, whilst finding numerous ways in which to keep himself occupied and out of his brother's reach and influence. Although that obnoxious scamp was still expanding his influence, it was a small price to pay for being ignored and unbothered. It was worth it in the long run, Cooler thought. Cooler did something that his father and brother, they found rather unbelievable and unimportant. One day, Freeza did confront him via remote communication links about his busy schedule. It was one of those things that was starting to bother the young imp.
Well, you're trying to appear busier than you really are, as usual. Seriously, you should cut out the posing. You're almost making me look like a fool.
Forgive me, brother dearest, with a very unsincere smile, whilst using an energy beam to obliterate one of his practice targets. Yeah, he was kind of multitasking, making an effort to prepare for impending obstacles.
Of course, I could easily destroy you, but fortunately for you, we are family. I sincerely hope you are not assembling a force to unseat me now, are you? Since you would, of course, have no chance of success in that department.
The elder brother simply smirked, but refrained from taking the bait. Oh, sure, let his little baby brother think that. He opted to respond with a remark of his own instead. These are very assured words from someone who was terrified of the big bad Super Saiyan. Freeza, yep, as predicted, became clearly irritated.
Now you look here. If you must know, this line is confidential. I hope it's just you and I talking.
Yes, I agree, brother. It's only you and I.
And if you must know, Lord Beerus asked me to perform the task.
His older brother briefly halted his workout. That was interesting. Lord Beerus. Beerus surely wouldn't be interested in our own business.
None, actually. I made a deal with him. And as payment, he gave me permission to destroy some planets for him. And as a result, he ignores our operations. Because apparently we're treading on his toes.
So what you're saying is we've suddenly become the god of destruction's lackeys? For a brief moment, Cooler looked solemn at this.
Listen, you and I both know that one of the two beings that Father Dearest had mentioned that we should not be challenging whatsoever were either Majin Buu or Beerus himself.
Okay, yes, that was correct. Even though the location of Majin Buu's current sealed ball or wherever was unknown. Okay, well what about the wizard goat thing? Is he being held by the Galactic Patrol still?
That is in fact the reason, brother, we still permit them to exist, the Galactic Patrol. Of course, according to Father. To support this object. It appears to be still too old and decayed to do anything, though.
Cooler gave it some thought. That still makes us Beerus's lackeys. In a smirk, Freeza countered.
Beerus will eventually look for a successor or replacement anyway, brother. And if I play my cards right...
You? The older brother arched an eyebrow and said, a god of destruction?
So why not? The pure joy of destruction is lacking in you. I'm sure he'd think I'm a better fit for the job.
You can either destroy the entire population or subjugate it, but you have to keep it to use their resources. All of this destroying has just struck me as being incredibly wasteful. Okay, dearest brother, why don't you just keep up your pointless efforts then?
Well, I formed an alliance with the god of destruction whilst you were just there playing, but feel free to amuse yourself, I don't care.
Cooler did consider telling Freeza about the Saiyan pod that he had allowed to slip by, before he then chose for the better and cut off the transmission. Now that he was aware of Beerus's influence, things had become somewhat different. Now, even though his family were the furthest thing away from being considered spiritual, they were aware that there were gods around, and they were physical beings instead of just metaphorical biblical interpretations. They were real folks, actually, and they used to be mortals in a way. The god of destruction was apparently infinitely stronger too than any of them, but according to his father, King Cold, The one that was currently residing within this universe was more of a moody force of nature than a living being most of the time. That is, if he was actually awake. If even one more Saiyan survived, would that make him subject to Beerus's wrath? Because according to his brother, Beerus had asked him to destroy the Saiyans, so if one slipped out... Nah, let Frieza take care of that, he thought. Prince Vegeta, who was as spoiled and annoying as his own brother, was the top Saiyan left among the ones that he'd already kept as pets. So honestly, if Beerus did come a-knockin', let Frieza deal with it. Cooler understood, though, the value of those two to one another. There was sort of a symbiotic relationship. Well, on the one hand, what his sibling had told him wasn't entirely illogical, so there had to be some credit due. A partnership of some kind with a god of destruction did represent a significant victory for their species. On the celestial grand scheme of things, they were to be taken seriously. And despite their animosity toward one another, maintaining their family's dominance over the entire universe, not just this galaxy, was of the utmost importance. At least Cooler could understand that. They could sure divide up the remaining items of what was left once they were finished, but up until that point, once the final victory had been gotten, it's best to not cause fights to break out. The question was, though, was whether Cooler actually desired to live in a universe in which Freeza would serve as the new god of destruction. Well, you can check out this what if up top, by the way, in a world where he did. So that's why Cooler continued to train, unlike his brother and father. Outside of their clan, he never gave his race's other members much thought, but they did view Cooler, his father, and his brothers as mutants, entirely nothing like them. Because it is believed in Dragon Ball theory that they are mutants of a certain race, but we still don't know the origins of their species. However, Cold and Frieza never really thought about pursuing the full potential of their status as such, contenting themselves remaining in their first and second forms, even though they all knew there was at least two more available. And regarding his brother, it resulted from him of a need for the destructive nature of his fourth and supposedly final form. And as for his father, well, the only reason he even bothered with the second form, as was the parlor, was it was purely decorative and intended to intimidate. Big, giant, scary monster. That usually got your way in trade negotiations. For Cooler, being in the first or second form, none of those reasons for justification were sufficient. He was searching for something greater. Perhaps there was something left available after the fourth form that their creators of those mutants hadn't intended. Something that would set him apart from them both. And by the gods, he would find it. Years of preparation and self-control were required for him to avoid accidentally killing his own armoured squadron. Because after all, he'd actually grown to like them. It would be terrible and messy if he suddenly killed them. So yes, he did go on to discover a form that was not the fourth. But he kept it a secret. Not even the Ginyu Force knew about it. The only people who did were his armoured squadron, and he forced his men to make an oath promising not to tell anyone else. He sensed that as they saw the transformation, it strengthened their devotion to him. Good. That was the intended byproduct. Very advantageous indeed. If they betrayed him, he'd come after them in that form. After that success, Cooler seemed somewhat aimless for a while. Simply just widening the Empire's net of control over the cosmos. Same old, same old. That no significant challenge had presented itself was incredibly annoying. It was so irritating, he thought. Why couldn't there be something to make his life more interesting? Perhaps his brother might have been right for once. Maybe he thought too highly of the galaxy. That pretty much, they were it. Maybe nobody would show up to oppose their might after all. Well, that would have been, to put it mildly, disappointing. The worst news, however, was yet to come. After the destruction of the planet Vegeta, roughly 28 standard years later, Cooler was celebrating his victory over yet another civilization. Even though it happened all the time, the end result, the afterglow, was still nice. His armoured squadron approached him as he was sitting amongst the ruins of a culture that had resisted him bitterly. Yeah, they got the worst treatment, and they were appearing to have difficulty communicating with him based on their facial expressions. "Come on, speak up right away! You are not some timid schoolchildren, men! You are soldiers!"
My lord, we recently learned that Lord Freeza, your brother, has died on planet Namek.
The eyes of Cooler widened. Really? That fool. To let himself get so decadent and soft. Who did it? What Namekian was it that could actually do such a thing?
No, Monsieur Cooler.
Salza trying to appear composed, but utterly failing.
It was a Saiyan who did it.
Something flashed before Cooler's eyes. So, despite deriving from our illustrious bloodline, my brother allowed himself to be killed. I need to talk to Father. Prepare the long-wave links for a transmission. The long-range communicators were being readied as his group saluted him, and Cooler was trying now to process what he had just learned. Unfortunately, he hadn't felt satisfied by what had happened. He thought the death of his brother would have been catharsis, but maybe the loss of Freeza did bother him. Or maybe he was just hoping to have killed him himself. Somebody else got there first. In either case, it was a letdown. King Cold, though, was difficult to reach for about several days or so. Perhaps he was processing the event as well and didn't want to be bothered.
I want to be alone.
But when he did get through, Cold was irritated. He nearly grit his teeth throughout the entire thing as he asked,
What do you want?
Given what has happened, Father, I was just wanting to know how you were doing.
You must know he is still alive. I found him, but left the state of him. And as we speak, my best cybernetics are doing their best to take care of him.
It was a relief to find out that his brother had proven to be reasonably reliant, but for him to require cyborg work? I see. So there must have been some significant damage.
Yes, indeed, that's good. So, what is it that you actually want? I am rather busy.
Yes, King Cold was unusually irritated. Yes, well, that's good to know, Father. So what do you have in mind, then? King Cold's response was unusually irritable.
What sort of an idiotic question is that? Surely you would know what would happen. Consequences. After I have rebuilt him, we travel to Earth to exact our retribution. No monkey left shall ever threaten our species.
Cooler's mind was slightly perturbed by one of the words in what his father had uttered, but he made an effort not to show it. He didn't want to be rumbled that he could have presented it.
Earth, you say? Haven't you realized it? For all of these years, a Saiyan has been hiding on the faraway planet of Earth.
If it's a Super Saiyan, then, what then? Are you going to hope for the best and charge him with all guns blazing, Father?
There is no such thing as a Super Saiyan, boy!
Cold had become rather emotional, raising his voice in a rare outburst. And yet your favorite son is lying in pieces, helpless in the hands of surgeons and prosthetic creators. There has to be a connection here.
Oh, so that's what it is. I see. I've always known you to be envious of your brother, but this goes beyond the pale.
No, Father, I am not envious of his third-degree burns and amputations. I called you to discuss something else, a possible course of action for the both of us. But since you, Father, have decided to act rather foolishly, I suppose I won't bother. Okay, go ahead. Rebuild Freeza and prove your mettle to the Saiyan by going to Earth. I'm hoping it's just my jealousy getting in the way and not common sense, and that you'll make it back alive in time for tea. The conversation very quickly came to an end when Cold had become enraged by this posturing. It in fact would end up being their final conversation ever, because Cooler, not long after that, received a dire message. His father and newly rebuilt brother still hadn't arrived back from their trip to Earth. Oh dear. Although he wouldn't be surprised by the ultimate outcome, Cooler wanted to say that he was. Looked like, yes, this was a travesty. He nodded as Salza delivered the news. Salza, get our ship ready. This Saiyan and his planet will be destroyed by me. It would have to wait though, because the Empire now was in total disarray. But he needed to make his point very clear. He was aware that his father and brother had apparently been insufficient to defeat this Saiyan, and that he would need to alter his strategy accordingly. But it wasn't too bad. He still had his fifth form though, something that was still a secret to everyone except the squadron. Not even his father and brother knew. His father and brother could only imagine the new transformation. If they had actually seen it though, it would have been so good. That might have actually been the secret to their success if he'd actually bothered to show them. But he wasn't exaggerating the danger though. He would need to be prepared for anything that came his way. If this supposed person really was a Super Saiyan, and gathering intelligence was the first thing he would have to do. When they were approaching Earth, his immediate thoughts were looming towards the thoughts of, who or what am I actually dealing with? There may have been some guilt sprinkled in there, if he was capable of feeling such things. But for Cooler though, there wasn't. He had a simple, unwavering clarity to his objective. For his bloodline, vengeance. And that's where we're going to be leaving things for right now.